Hello and welcome to At the 55, your home for OUA football. Me and Tom are back on the mic setting up this year's Vanier Cup live and direct from Kingston, Ontario. The Laval Rouge et Or duking it out with the Laurier Golden Hawks RSCQ versus the OUA, the matchup so many of us were clamoring for throughout this USport playoff to get to the pinnacle of all USport football. We'll talk about that game and much more. But first, Tom, how the heck you doing, my friend?
Oh, I'm mixed with so many emotions, my man. Well, this is the ultimate game between
Mm.
the two best teams in the entirety of U Sports. It also means it's the very last U Sports football game of the 2024 season. And that certainly brings a bit of a tear to my eye, but I really think that we've saved the best for last with these two teams here.
It's certainly a heck of a matchup, and we're recording this on Wednesday, November 20th. I'm looking at this nice counter they have on the USport website. 2 hours, 18, 2 days, 18 hours, 35 minutes, and now 6 seconds away from kickoff. And in that time, after you're hearing this podcast or whenever you're listening to it, so it might be in the past, thank you for tuning in as always. We will have our Heck Crichton Award winner as well as the All Canadians that will be released, I believe, this Thursday when they do that big gala from Kingston. So obviously some other news to keep you abreast to, but we want to make sure this podcast was out so you could mull over all the angles, all the thoughts that you have and our how we're seeing it long before we get into this matchup. And Tom, really there's nothing else on our docket but to dive into it. And off the jump, I'm just thinking narrative wise, thinking of this matchup, this all-time electric offense that Laurier's been putting together through the air, on the ground. Heck Crichton nominee and possible winner in Taylor Elgersma. All these weapons. Ryan Hughes coming off the bench to be now one of the playoff leaders in touchdowns across U Sports. And then on the other hand, Laval, a team that has been winning on this defense all year long. As you've talked about, you don't make it out of the RSCQ without a dominant defense. And that's a fun way to paint the narrative. But when you actually look at it, you're like, oh, no, Laurier's defense is also really dominant. And right, one of the other possible winners of that Heck Crichton is Arnaud Desjardins with a Laval offense averaging 32 points coming out of the RCQ. I know they get to beat up on some of those other foes, but when you play Montreal twice in the regular season and average 32, that's stellar. So throw out the cliches, throw out the framing of this. This is two titans of U Sport football duking it out. Tom, what are your first impressions of this matchup?
It's interesting to me because obviously these teams haven't played each other as of yet. There was no crossovers or anything. But this is one of the best defenses in the country against certainly the best offense that we've seen in the country. And an underrated offense against an underrated defense. There's some similarities in here for sure, but both of those matchups mean that we are going to see fantastic showcases in here. I was really racking through my brain and kind of going through. I think on paper, at least, based off of everything that's gone on previously, I think this is the best offense that Coach Glenn Constantine has faced while with the Laval Rouge et Or. Obviously, those McMaster teams that we played against them were very good, and I'm wearing a ring because of everything that was going on there. But we had outstanding defenses that were just as if not even better than that. And you look at obviously with Jonathan Senecal and Chris Merchant back in 2017 in those Western days. But when you look at the numbers and when you look at the production that this team has been putting up, these Laurier Golden Hawks, if it's not the number one, it's certainly in the top three of the best offenses that Coach Constantine has ever had to gone against.
I love the way you paint the picture like that because in going through some of those teams and some of those quarterbacks, you intentionally or unintentionally named off other Heck Crichton winners who they've had to deal with. And again, by the time we're kicking off, it might be another that they're dealing with in Taylor Elgersma. And it's just an offense that's been so explosive that it's fascinating where we talk about those semifinal matchups and how Laval and Laurier's gotten here. Well, Laval's coming off a gritty defensive struggle, a rock fight, as you were quoting Jim Mullen talking about that matchup going into it. He was bang on in that analysis. And then on the other hand, you have Laurier, who's coming in, flexing their muscles of that offense, looking so sharp, not missing a single beat on that offense. So in many ways, they're coming into this matchup in games that reflect that kind of core essence that we look at them, that kind of snap judgment and say, Laval, it's all-time defense. And as far as the numbers in front of that got them there, and I should have brought up the Montreal numbers from last year because it would be a very fascinating point of comparison where you have this Laval team that's giving up 13.3 points per game, less than 300 all combined in yards, only 184 in the air, 113 on the ground. Like you don't move the ball on this team. We know what Montreal can do offensively. We know that Regina team, obviously, we thought of them as another defensive juggernaut, but they had a couple splash plays. You said it perfectly. They probably haven't dealt with an explosive offense, the likes of Laurier this season, let alone to your point of Glenn Constantine's time there and whether he's faced an offense as tremendous as this. I'm not going to be for 1 second calling this a no doubter to say that, well, Laval hasn't seen anything like this Laurier offense. It's a no doubter. Put all your money on gold and purple, not gold and red or rouge, or if you will. What are the things that you're looking at this Laval defense? We talked about that front seven being so dominant that you think will cause that Laurier offense a bit of a struggle on this day, or perhaps you're not even there because frankly, we have not seen this Laurier offense struggle at all. I'm just baking in some of that institutional respect you give to a Coach Glenn Constantine coached team, knowing he's a defensive guy and how stellar that defense has been. Like, where is it that you see this Laval team? We've gone through the numbers. We'll go through, no doubt, some of the individual players that they can slow this team down because so far, nobody has done that.
The thing that Coach Constantine and this Laval squad is so good at is preparing for championship games and getting the guys correct and getting them proper going into these big moments. The thing that really sticks out to me is that 2012 Vanier Cup loss that we had to the Laval Rouge et Or just after the 2012 team. And the defense that we saw was completely different from the defense that we had seen in game film and from the previous year. And it was because they were preparing something with the idea being that they were going to see us. And at the time, specifically talking from the offensive line, because obviously that's where I played and that's what I have the best memory of. Typically, in nowadays, you will see on a 60 pro with six players blocking, you'll see the backside of that offensive line slide protect. So you're sliding to pick up the last three. Typically, if you're going 60 pro to the strong side, it's the D tackle, the D end, and the will linebacker. In my first few years at McMaster, instead of doing a slide technique, we did a pop technique. So if you had a one tech and you had a defensive end, your center and your tackle would stay on those guys, and your guard would actually pop back out to get space and depth, so that if that will linebacker blitz from depth, you would track him. And I'd go out and around my tackle and I'd go to block him. Now, obviously, if he was up on the line, we'd slide to that, whatever, but I don't want to get too far in the weeds. So what they did was they utilized that, being that, okay, the guard's going to stay here. So they walked up the linebacker directly over the guard. And then we go to pop back out. That linebacker drops, quote unquote, drops like he's about to, and they send the half blitz at the same time. Gorgeous. So you go, oh, I have to get back out to the half. So you turn and run immediately to the half. But that linebacker that walked up, he looked like he was fading, and then he came. That day, that game, McMaster gave up 7 sacks because of that defense, because they were keying on the fact of how we played and how we protected on the offensive line. That's Coach Constantine, and that's some of the stuff that Laval is going to bring here. We saw a little bit of a different defense from the Bishop's Gators when they played against Laurier to start with in that 3-4 front where the outside linebackers were walked up almost as wide ends. Expect to see a different defense, even if they're in a standard 4-3 front like they've been seeing. You're going to see a half blitz if you haven't seen it before. You're going to see a safety blitz potentially if you haven't seen it before. This is a Laval squad that is the best coached on the defensive side with Coach Constantine and that outstanding staff that he has. You are not going to just get what you saw on film. It's going to be some new stuff. There's going to be some new wrinkles in there. I can promise you that.
When are we going to do our like offensive lineman only content? Because I want to dive way into that one. I don't care for that 50 pop. I don't like the levels it creates on the line, but I'm not going to go down the rabbit hole of talking on that one for too long. For all the O line coaches out there listening to this, give us a shout. We need some O line content coming your way. But, you brought up the point following, I think it was the Coupe Dunsmore Cup where we saw, especially late in that game, that major strip sack fumble by Loic Brodeur, and the way that they just slowly but surely collapsed that pocket. Now, this is a Laurier offensive line that's been so good, and the flipping of the tackles is perhaps something that Laval hasn't seen. I can't imagine there are many folks doing it out there, which again, shout out to Coach Scotto for the creativity, and his rationale is beautiful. It just keeps it simple in terms of the matchups and everything like that. But you add on to, we obviously saw Brodeur in that game, and he's a rookie player out there, I believe, for him coming up big in those clutch moments. But having three players in Myong, Saint-Hilaire, and Cloutier, all with 4.5 sacks, or sorry, Cloutier only with the 4, but 4.5 from Saint-Hilaire and Myong, where this front seven, as you've been noting, can get after the quarterback.
Uh-huh.
Obviously, as far as the matchup with Laurier, as you said, no preseason games we can go to. I think these teams matched up in a preseason game, maybe in 2016 or 17. I'm trying to recall. It might have been the year after Laurier beat Western, so maybe in 2017. So that's pretty well not going to be of any use for these clubs to be able to look at. With the way that Laval creates pressure, seemingly without having to send too much extra in there, that just stay their gaps, slowly but surely collapse that pocket. You obviously have to have assurance down the field. When you look at Taylor Elgersma, when you look at the way that Coach Todd Boulders Galloway will call the play you least expect, second and long, gives the handoff, draw plays, all these types of things, the screen plays. That matchup, the pressure that Laval can create, but the creativity that Laurier can show to get the ball out quickly. What are some of the things, as far as the coaching side of it, that you would like to see Laurier trot out there to be able to mitigate the fact that this is a Laval defense that, if left unchecked, will probably tag up Elgersma a couple times?
Yeah, and I love that you brought that up because not only do you defend against the defense with an outstanding offensive line, but you defend against them by play calling. And that's what our guy and Coach Todd Boulders Galloway will be doing here. And that's why when you see one of the things that this Laurier squad is so effective at is those quick passes where Taylor gets the ball, it's a quick rock and throw, and then suddenly in the hands of his guys like Ethan Jordan or Raiden Thorne or now obviously Ryan Hughes, and you've got to step on somebody or it's make one guy miss and then you're gone for 20, 30, 40 yards. That's where this Laurier squad really excels in getting defenses to stay back and just send your four guys up front because you can't afford to be sending extra pressure here because the moment that you send a Will, Max, Sam blitz, you got a receiver who's sitting right in that pocket where you just left, and that's a quick little rip right out to there. Now, obviously, the way to combat that is if you are going to blitz, you have to have your defensive backs really playing aggressive here. Your safety needs to come up and potentially, knock a slot receiver's head off if they're trying to do something like that, which then opens up the deep ball. And if there's one thing that this Laurier squad can do, it's throw the friggin' deep ball. So there's a lot of areas here where this Laurier squad is successful, and there's a lot of things that Coach Galloway does in order to keep defenses honest and in order to make sure that they're not just coming completely free will all the time. The other aspect of that is by having the Laurier offense dictate the pace of the game. They've been doing that the entire year so far, scoring fast, scoring often, getting up ahead of their opponents. And now suddenly, when you're up by 1, 2, 3 touchdowns, you're not beholden to doing one thing. As opposed to if you're down by 2 scores, well, the run game's essentially gone. You have to throw the ball. You have to be moving the ball, especially if you're getting later on in the game. Being up and being able to score quickly like this Laurier squad has been doing this entire year, that means that Tanner Nelms is always going to be there. A jet sweep with Laomi Ojotolayo is always going to be there. Or as soon as you get teams are starting to play up, a Taylor Elgersma bomb is always going to be there. So that's really what I'm looking to see here from this Laurier squad is to continue doing what you do best. Get the ball in the hands of your outstanding playmakers here and keep that Laval defense honest because if you don't, Their front four is good enough to get pressure and get sacks. And if you allow additional linebackers and halfbacks to blitz and be unchecked, it's going to be a very long game. This is a Laurier squad, a Laurier offensive line that has been playing outstanding. And I want to make sure that I'm emphasizing that outstanding. But this is also a squad that in 3 games has given up 8 sacks, 4 of which came last week against the Bishop Gators. Now, you talk about hey, it was a different defense, something they may not have been accustomed to it, whatever. It's going to be a different defense against Laval. And I don't think you're going to have a few plays, a few series, a quarter to get yourself ready and adjusted. Because as you mentioned, Arnold Desjardins is the other Heck Crichton nominee. And when he's got guys like Olivier Cool to throw to, they can score just as quickly as Laurier can. So you got to be as prepared as humanly possibly as you can be.
Most certainly. And I love you brought up Desjardins because you know what? I want to go through the numbers as comparing because we've talked about what Desjardins done. You've done a great job detailing that. But we obviously, being more OUA focused, well, a lot more OUA focused, we're familiar with what Taylor did. But by the numbers, starting with Elgersmo, we've read this off, but about 75% completion percentage, 74.5 to be exact, 330 in the air, 20 touchdowns, 9 interceptions. Desjardins right there with him at 75.9%. 29.6, 17 touchdowns, the 1 interception. So the young man's not making mistakes. He's been on this pedestal before. I mean, he won his Vanier Cup in Ontario as well as on the other side of the province in London. Now he's going to try and do it closer to home in Kingston. He's got the moxie to do it. He's been there. You've talked about how last year obviously was a major down year for him. Fascinating to think about the growth that might have come from that as far as when you reach the pinnacle that any player in the whole league can get to, you fall off, and now you're back here on the rise. It certainly makes for great storytelling from that vantage point. But I think that from what we've seen with Laurier, the swagger that they bring into this, it's now almost 20 years since they've been in a Vanier. We know that this team has not made it out of Ontario in almost 10 years as well. There isn't part of me for one instance. Like it's one thing when Classic want to rag on the AUS a little bit and say, all right, national semi, but you're playing the AUS. You know what? Put that aside. We're talking about the Vanier Cup. Yeah, I'm not even going into this with any sense of, part of the angle that has to be talked about is the fact that, yes, Laval was there 2 years ago, raising that thing up, and Laurier's making their comeback after a bit of a hiatus. But that doesn't resonate with me. That I don't think about that and look at this as a team that's going to come in timid, that's going to be, in fear of the moment. It's an Ontario-based one, though. To our Laurier folks, pack that house, man.
Oh,
The number one thing I'm somewhat dreading, even though it'll make for a great atmosphere nonetheless, is that those Quebec fans are going to drown out Laurier fans a bit.
mhm.
This is my call to action for you, Laurier faithful. We know how you can pack that place at University Stadium. You better have your tickets booked. We better see you there because we're going to be there. Anyways, the stage doesn't frighten me from Laurier's standpoint. I don't think there's anything as far as that vantage point to your eyes. You got a Vanier Cup winning quarterback there. You brought up your guy, Olivier Cool. I'll certainly give you space to wax poetic about him and all the great things he does. I don't think the stage is a piece of concern for Laurier. Do you see that experience for Laval having having an advantage? Because it makes all the sense in the world to say that that's where you give a tick towards Laval. But I don't know. We know this Laurier team too well to think that they're going to be afraid of the moment.
Yeah, I think if anything, there's a few things that go into this. Obviously, like you mentioned, Laval having been there before is a massive bonus for them because they've been there so often that I'm sure they have Vanier Cup traditions. This is what we do every time that we go into a Vanier Cup because
God damn it, Laval.
Since their inception, they've been to 13 of them. So I'm sure they've already got some stuff going on. Anyways, there's a couple of things that, in my opinion, are also benefiting the Laurier Golden Hawks here. We've seen time and time again when those big games happen, when those big moments happen, we see Laurier at their very best. This is a team that gets up for the big games, the intense games. And the other aspect that's really helping them here is that they're traveling only to Kingston. There's not like you're traveling out of the province to a stadium you've never been to before and the lights and whatever else. They played in Kingston. They've won in Kingston, albeit against the Queen's Gales, but this is not a stadium that they're not familiar with. This is, you know, it's only a what, 3, 4 hour drive from Waterloo
Yeah.
to Kingston, maybe not even. This is not going to be a, oh my goodness, what the hell. This is still very much a team in the OUA, a school in the OUA that they've been to and they've played at. Sure, there's going to be a whole ton of lights, bells, and whistles and everything else that goes into a performance like this, but this is not going to be, a massive change of pace here. One of the biggest things, that happened in my time at McMaster, obviously the first Vanier Cup, the one that we win, we're out in BC and we're playing against Laval in BC. So none of us are used to that. And then we play them in Toronto. And while that's close to home, it's still in the Sky Dome. It's still a massive stadium. We have, I think it was like 41,000, 42,000 people out to watch that game. Incredible. And then in 2014, we play Montreal in Montreal in a stadium of 25,000 fans, 24,000 of which are Montreal fans. So there's a lot of exterior factors that go into that. And you're thinking, oh my gosh, there's so much happening along with this being a big game because you're going to Kingston and because we better, like you mentioned, we better be seeing a Laurier faithful coming down to this friggin' game. This should be something of a familiar setting for them at bare minimum. It's a big game. There's lots going on for sure, but there's a lot of factors that help this Laurier squad keep this to be as normal a week as you could possibly hope for a national championship.
And it goes back to what we've been talking about since we'd caught wind of the story. As you were mentioning, he was posting on his own social media. Laurier, though they haven't been to this stage, they've been preparing for this stage for the decade and change that Coach Faulds has been at that program leading them. We had the quarterback conversation. I mean, we can go through if we want to, sort of position group by position group, give our checks and pluses wherever we want to make our decision on this one. But I think it's worthwhile looking at the run game for these two clubs. And obviously, we've been infatuated with what we've seen Tanner Nelms do all year long, not just in his performance, but the way that Coach Galley is using him. And we obviously know what Tayshaun Jackson can do on all facets of the game and specials, of course. But then looking at that UTEC Bowl, where he gets the bulk of the carries for Laval. We know that they have guys like Mathieu Roy, who had a great game in that Mitchell Bowl, the 13 attempts, but also adding in 7 receptions. They're using him in the versatility out of the backfield. A guy like Angel Vital as another key runner for them in the mix. He talked about it already. If this is a Laurier team that can get out early and get up, by a couple scores, it's going to be hard for Laval to be able to incorporate that run game. Everyone in that stadium knows that the Desjardins to Cool connection is as guaranteed a connection as you can get. I couldn't even believe it going back to that Mitchell Bowl, where how with the attention you could see Regina's paying to him. He's always finding ways, that craftiness that they were talking about on the broadcast that he brings to the table. He knows how to find space, and the connection is so sharp. If they get behind, like, does it just feel like they're going to have to just rely on that Desjardins to Cool connection? Can they keep the run game alive? Like, you obviously, as a former offensive lineman, we know that importance of making sure, especially just for the offensive line up front, every now and then you got to dial up a run play for those big guys up front. It's been the Desjardins Cool show all year long. This offense is dealing with a great defense, a great front seven, one of the best linebacking cores that they're going to have to deal with Gregorczyk and Wilkins. Do they abandon the run game if it goes sour? Obviously, Roy can get into the pass game a little bit there. How do you see them trying to traverse a couple Laurier scorers early?
I think if you're Laval here, I mean, even during the regular season, they only average around 139 rush yards per game. This is a squad that likes to pass the ball more than they like to run the ball. And I think a lot of their strengths, especially from an offensive side, are from the pass game rather than the run game. Obviously, Mathieu Roy is incredible in the things that he is able to do, and Angel Vital when he gets in there as well. But this is a squad where your RSEQ MVP, your Heck Crichton hopeful, is your quarterback, and probably should have been your receiver in Olivier Cool with everything that he's been doing this year, and certainly how he's been coming up big. In contrast to that, in the regular season, they averaged 304 yards in the air per game. This is a squad that likes to pass the ball more than they like to run the ball, even initially. And to be honest with you, while this is another outstanding Laval offensive line, as it always is, I think the strength, one of the big strengths of that Laurier defense is the front seven, is the way that Ethan Gregorczyk has been playing with the guys up in front of him. Mateo LaQuintana obviously being an outstanding pass rush specialist, but Chisenham Incident demanding double teams every single play allows linebackers to flow. Jesse Wilkins doing his thing as well. So I think it plays a little bit better. Now, obviously, you're throwing into guys like Ethan Bayfield, Harno Dollywall, so it's kind of like a pick your poison type deal. But it, to me, I think the offensive game plan for Laval is going to be passing the ball, and I would not be surprised to see Laval start taking shots early to try to get up before Laurier gets up. Something of a insane statistic that I have here for you. In the three playoff games that Laurier has played in, the semifinal game, the Yates Cup, and now the UTEC Bowl, they scored 128 points and 15 touchdowns, which is ridiculous. 88 of those 128 total points were scored in the first half of those games. We talked about how these guys get up early and how they're able to dictate the course of the game. That's how that happens. And it happens so quickly, as you and I saw. Hey, it's a Western squad. Here's 4 touchdowns in a row, back to back to back to back, off of ensuing drives. Hey, here's a Queen squad where it just takes 1 quarter, 3 minutes, 4 minutes left in the first half, and they put up 23 unanswered points. This is another squad against Bishops. They put up 34 points going into the first half. So this is a squad that scores and scores quickly, and goes right back to what we were saying. They're able to dictate the flow of the game because they're scoring so often and because that offense is so good. If Laval can lean on their pass game and really try to get things going into this one, I think they have a chance to dictate the pace themselves. Now, I really think that Laval's path to get into this game has been a hell of a slog. Getting through a Montreal defense that returned a lot of those guys that were from that record-setting year as of last year, and then getting through arguably the best defense of the 4 remaining teams at the time in the Regina Rams here, and obviously coming through with that one. So this is an offense that, while certainly has struggled in certain games here, it's for damn good reasons, because the quality of play that they've been going up against has been outstanding. I don't know how well they're going to be able to do here, but I really think that Laval's primary target is going to be to score and score often, especially up as soon as they can, to get Laurier on their heels a little bit and to get them in a situation that they're not comfortable with.
It's yes. I mean, certainly that's got to be how they want to attack it. And I think, again, when you look at the way the Desjardins Cool connection works in contrast to Elgersma and those explosive plays, yes, he can get those screen game going, but we've seen guys like Oja Delayo take a screen pass, cut across the field, and then there he's gone for 70, 80 yards on a touchdown. I think a factor that will go to Laval's favor is yes, scoring often, but the way they move the ball in comparison to Laurier, they chew up a bit more clock doing it. Like, it's actually kind of funny when you look at time of possession. Laurier ends up falling towards like the bottom, like third, or even maybe less than that across all USports. And then you have to quickly think about it, saying, well, hold on, why is that? Because when they have the ball, they don't have it for very long because they end up scoring. And I remember talking with some of the coaches at the Laurier Queens game on the Queens side of things, like, man, like what's the game plan here? Because that was a Queens team that was beat up. They're the obvious underdog. They're on the road. And I remember talking to a few of them, and it was just like, however we do it, we have to control time of possession. And Queens did a really good job of that in that game, even despite not giving Kasari the ball as much as we thought they would have been doing. No offense there, Nez. I'm sure there was the reason going on there. But Laval's done a better job on the year with time of possession, and part of that, no doubt, is from some of those really duke them out, beat them up rock fights that they have to play in the RSCQ. But the way you see Cool coming across the middle, the way he can take those deep shots, I think that that's going to be something in their favor to just make sure that the game stays. I mean, like we talked about this with the Regina game, that if it's a low-scoring affair, you have to think that Laval's going to be favored in that one. I think if you're Laval, you have to be hoping that, it sounds stupid just saying it because we know who we're talking about with Laurier, that you keep it to like 24-21 kind of range. Like, is that the possibility there? And again, I feel silly because I feel through all this conversation we're having, it's so heavily leaning towards Laurier, and there's the obvious bias in that we know their strengths better than we can speak on Laval's. But I'm also just trying to, like, there's not, by that same logic, we should know their weaknesses as well. And I don't know the angle by which you say this is where they'll get them and they'll get them good. We can talk about penalties where, Laurier outranks them a little bit. It's not a major gap. The turnovers on defense, Laurier is not one of the top there, but we know that they can make explosive plays with that defense. I don't know, Tom. I'm bullish on our OUA team, to say the least here. What other angles have you been digging up that people need to know going into this game?
So there's a lot of things that go into a Vanier Cup. Obviously, there's one of the big things that we weren't. Some things that you just don't even think about when you're going into this game. I mean, you go in at halftime and it's a standard, 15 minutes typically. You're doing your thing, you make your quick checks, and then you're back out onto the field. Vanier Cups have halftime performances. And so there's obviously a couple of times where we're in the Vanier Cup and we make our checks like we're doing our thing. We go back out, and the coaches go, fellas, we still got like 30 minutes, 40 minutes before we're going back out there. And you're sitting there going like, what do you mean? Like, we just have to like kind of chill here for a second, because coaches don't want to overwhelm you with all the changes to be made. And realistically speaking, it's not like you're completely changing a playbook just during halftime. You might make a couple tweaks here or there. Hey, this is a side of the offense we really like. We're going to try to focus on this rather than this, what we have been doing. And then you're just in there. And so you're just focusing on the game. You're focusing on the magnitude of the game, and it just seeps into your soul, even when you're not trying to think about it, because this is the Vanier Cup. This is everything that you have put in the work for. All of those 6 a.m. lifts, every single ache and bruise and maybe torn ligament, maybe broken bone, whatever you're playing through, is to get to this moment, to lift the greatest trophy in USports history with the Vanier Cup. And when you go into this, and I'll get into my own experiences with Laval, and I don't want to turn this into about me, but I just want to give the folks a bit of a feeling into this. When you run out onto the stadium here, you go out, especially if Laval has gone first, but even if not, you run out into the stadium, you do your thing. The entire time you're there, the Laval squad is at the number, sometimes on the hash mark, and they're yelling, they're screaming, they're jawing at you the whole time. This is something they only do in these playoff games against other teams, because the teams in the RSCQ, obviously, they know the Laval Rouge et Or, and that's not something that's not a huge intimidation factor. It's not whatever else. But the mystique of the Laval squad, the squad that since 1999, when they were first created, has been to 13 Vanier Cups and won 11 of them, only losing to the Western Mustangs and to my McMaster Marauders here.
Baby.
But this is a squad that knows there is a certain, as the kids say, aura around this team. You know that when you're playing against the Laval squad, this is a squad that's going to be some of the best coach players that you're going up against. And there's already going to be some butterflies in there. Even for the most veteran of guys, it's the biggest stage. You're only 2 teams left. It's the national championship. There's going to be some. And you look over and you've got an entire squad who's barking at you, who's yelling at you, who's doing all of that. And anywhere else, maybe that'd be intimidating. Not for this Laurier squad, and not for our guy in Elgersma. You know that's just going to get him fired up, and he's going to be going right back at them. But now suddenly when you get into a scenario here, and this Laurier squad has not been down, and has not been down by much this entire year, if Laval can get up on them, and it's a very real possibility that they can, because they've got outstanding players on there. If they're up on them and they're looking over at a hopefully packed Richardson Stadium, and even if the Laurier fans won't show up, you know damn well those Laval fans will, and they're yelling and they're screaming, and that's making it real loud, like you and I were experiencing just last year when those Montreal fans were there, and we felt the stadium shaking with how loud those Montreal fans were. There's extra pieces in here that change this into a more meaningful game. And now suddenly, if you're a Laurier fan or you're a Laurier team member and you're looking, Holy crap. Laval's had an answer for us on offense so far, and they've actually put up a couple of scores on while they're on offense. And now the crowd's getting into this, and now the lights are getting a little bit brighter, and now there's and now and now and now and now and now, and that's where things can really start to unravel here.
Tom, it's been 7 years since we've beaten Quebec.
Mm-hmm.
It's been 7 years. We won a Vanier in that time. And yes, I'm speaking
Mm-hmm.
as Ontario football. It's been 7 years. It's been since that 2017 Vanier Cup. And I'm certain as you were dictating, when those Laval Rouge are yelling and screaming at the opposing team coming out for those playoff games and those Vanier Cups, that's not coming out in English. So allow
Oh,
me.
oh, some of it is. Oh,
Some of
some
it
of it
is
is. They want to
okay.
make sure that you know what they're saying.
Well, then my hope is they'll know what I'm saying when they allow me to retort Québec. Nous venons pour vous. La Coupe Vanier restera en Ontario cette année. The Coupe Vanier Cup is staying in Ontario. Tom, I don't know what other angles we want to talk about. We're obviously focusing on this one game, but it's been a bloody long time. We fall last year to Montreal in the semis. We fall the year before to Laval in the semis. The year before, Western doesn't have to match up with them. Saskatchewan does our dirty work for them, but we're not happy with that. It doesn't really, they say it don't mean a thing if it ain't got that ring. Well, that ring don't shine quite as bright as it does when you get to take out a Quebec team on the way to do it. This was the exact narrative we said about Western coming into this year, that we wouldn't care if you won the Yates. We wouldn't care if you won a national semi. We wouldn't care if you went undefeated. We wouldn't care about any personal accolades that you were going to hoist up this year. As it happened, Laurier came in this year ready to snatch that title from Western, and they did with gusto on all angles. So, Laurier, this falls on you right now from everyone, from one end of the 401 to the other in Win City. You take this one and you keep that Vanier Cup here in Ontario this year. Tom, there's other angles we can look at. The actual kicking numbers are pretty staggering, and they're going in our favor with our guy Dawson Hodge. I'm not sure who the kicker is for Laval, but the numbers aren't too hot on his end for things this year. What else do you got, my friend? That's obviously my long-winded way of saying, like, let's go Hawks. Let's get this one done.
Yeah, when you look at this squad, when you look at a Laval squad, they have been through the gauntlet. They've been through a Montreal squad where they split the series and then won in at home for another Dunsmore Cup. They played against a stout Regina Rams defense, and now they're going up against a Laurier squad where this is a solid defense. I don't know how if you could say they're as good or better than the Regina Rams that they just went against, but an offense that is one of, if not the best offense that Coach Constantine has had to go up against his entire time here. I'm expecting middle linebacker Cloutier and Sam linebacker Saint Hilaire. Apologies if I butcher that. I'm
Beautiful.
expecting these guys to blitz. I'm expecting them to come, and I'm expecting some things that Laurier is not used to seeing here. I wouldn't be surprised if the first two, maybe even three drives that Laurier has not necessarily ends, but includes two or three sacks in those. Because that Laurier offensive line is still working out how to pick everything up, and there's no new stuff that's coming at us. I wouldn't be surprised if you see a little Will half fire constantly through this game with a safety that rotates down that's begging for a short pass to be thrown so you can pick that off. I'm saying that you're going to see the very best that this squad has. And it goes back to what you were saying with even last week when you're talking about Olivier Cool in this offense. It's not if you're going to stop him, it's how much you can keep him to. Because Mr. Cool is going to get his numbers. He's going to get his catches. He's going to get his opportunities because once again, we've seen this offense gets him the ball however they can. Even if you snuff him downfield, which is damn hard to do, but even if you do that, here's a jet sweep with him and blockers in front of him, and he's got speed and he's got the edge. Here's a screen pass with the same kind of concept here. Here's any possible way that we can get this young man the ball. And even if you do all of that, well, Arnaud Desjardins still got a pretty solid arm, and he can find a few of his other guys down the field as well. I'm expecting to see the very best from these squads. If it does come down to kicking, like you mentioned, I have a lot of faith in our guy in Dawson Hodge. I think he wins that battle, and I think he kicks it through. The other aspect of this as well, and I haven't checked the weather if you know that off the top of your head, but that's a Queen Stadium that is constantly blowing frickin' wind and is constantly having something that goes along with it, whether it's a little bit cold, whether we're going to get hammered with snow, whether it's going to be windy as all heck. This is another aspect, another area to really bring into this side of things. This is a Laval squad that, like I mentioned, is the most impressive USports program that we have seen. 11 Vanier Cups with 13 appearances, only losing 2 times is an insane statistic to see. But I'm going with the Laurier Golden Hawks here. They've chalked the loss up to 3. Another squad from Ontario is going to beat them for the 3rd time. The only teams that they've ever lost to in the Vanier Cup have been Ontario squads. It's going to be another one. The Golden Hawks are taking this one. Taylor Eldersma's going to go off. Let's go, Laurier.
Whenever you need someone to knock off Quebec, you got to send in the pros. Send in the OUA. Let's go, baby. Hold up the weather, by the way. High of 8, low of 2, cloudy all day. I don't trust that for a second. It's probably going to rain at some point on the day. But the game will shine bright, and if for no other reasons, because both these teams are touting gold in their color scheme. Again, to our Laurier faithful out there, and we know you tune in because we bloody see where people tune in from, and you get us a lot of listens. We really appreciate that, Laurier. We better see you in Kingston. You better be loud. Watch some tape of these guys. You know they're going to bring the ruckus. Match them step for step. Your boys, well, I think they can make it to the top without you there, but you know it's going to make their journey that much greater, and you don't want to miss this opportunity where they raise that trophy and put the capstone on this storybook season, completing the undefeated journey, the unfinished business from last year. The darn thing writes itself. And Tom, I'm so happy we've been here for the journey, and we will continue to be so, being there in Kingston on Saturday. Final thoughts, Tom, going into this Vanier Cup.
This is a Laval squad that, like we've mentioned, we've said this a couple of times, has been there before. This is Arnaud Desjardins, who has won a Vanier Cup before, just 2 years ago in Ontario, albeit, like you mentioned, on the other side of the province in London. This is a coaching staff in one Glenn Constantine, has more Vanier Cup rings than he has fingers. This is a squad that knows how to win. This is a squad that's been to the Vanier Cup so damn often. Like I mentioned, they have their own traditions when they get to a national championship. This is the first time that Coach Michael Fultz has ever been to a Vanier Cup in his coaching career. Ever. This is the first time that a Laurier squad has made it to that Vanier Cup. And like you mentioned, almost 20 years. But I don't think the lights scare them. I don't think the moment gets too much for them. I think this squad comes to play like it's any other damn week, and we see the Laurier Golden Hawks take this one. Please, 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 Laurier fans, get your frickin' butts in seats. They are going to need you for this game.
And OUA fans across the province, we are all Golden Hawks this weekend. Tom, outstanding job by you as always. As you highlighted at the start, it's the bittersweet moment when we reach this point of the year and recognize that we're at the pinnacle of our game. Yet that, of course, means that there won't be another on the other side of it. What there will be, though, of course, will be you and me breaking it down, following up this Vanier Cup right here at the 55.